So yes, I think we're live, and I'm here with my new friend, Guy. How are you doing, Guy?
I'm doing great, David. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah. Well, I cut you off rudely before going live because it's like this is good stuff. We gotta put this on the live stream, you know?
I know it's a good conversation. We should catch that.
But before we go back to that and all sorts of other stuff and what you're up to today, I always ask my guests to paint a little picture of the faith journey going way back, before the age of reason, like when you just had this impression that there's God and religion, and you saw
Hmm.
your beloved family members sort of bringing this
Yeah.
notion of God and religion into your life, all the way up through puberty and all that brings, and then up until today, all the highs and lows of your walk.
Wow. Wow. I have a somewhat unusual journey, I think. I've been told. Um, we were never raised with any form of religion for the most part at all until my mom married an Italian Catholic out of Newark, New Jersey.
Yeah.
And when we moved from Honolulu to Newark, she was basically told that she and her heathen children needed to get confirmed. And so I was, but it was Newark, New Jersey. So my introduction to Newark, New Jersey was a guy named David Wilkenfeld who basically said, "Hey, look at the kid with the flip flops. Boom, give me your money, flip flops." And he was in my confirmation class. So that did not go well. We both got essentially kicked out, and we had to kind of go back on different paths. And so, because my stepfather was so incredibly vulgar, abusive, nasty, never went to church, never really showed any type of faith, I think that turned me off to
Mm.
religion in a big way. And ultimately, by the age of 13, I was a homeless runaway on the streets of New York. We had moved, my mother said basically, we're moving back to California or I'm leaving you. So we moved back to California, and things got so bad that by the age of 13, I was a homeless runaway. And I was working alongside migrant workers to survive. I was learning that self reliance in a lot of ways, that I couldn't trust anyone. I could only trust myself, that if I wanted something, it was up to me to do it and to get it. And so that was both a good thing and a bad thing. And I kind of learned, I didn't really understand the difference between the two. But I went home briefly at age 14 because I really hadn't even gone to much of a full year of high school at that point, and thinking I would get my GED. At the time in California, you could get your GED based on work credits. And because I had been working since I was 11 or 12, and full time since I was 13, I figured I could get my GED, and I wouldn't, and I could. That was the minimum requirement, because up until that point, my entire life, I was told that I was worthless, I was stupid, I was basically kind of a piece of baggage that they had to, take along, and I was a burden. So during that time when I've gone back to school briefly, I was kind of cornered by a Hispanic gang, and in a very threatening way. And ultimately, I wound up, they wound up they picked a fight. I broke somebody's nose and I got suspended. So on my way home, um, furious at life, furious at the school, furious at everybody. Um, what we used to call back then a Jesus freak, crossed the street behind me, saw me as we passed, crossed the street behind me, and started kind of catching up with me. Now, I didn't really know what he wanted, but I was so furious. I turned around, I grabbed him by the shirt, and I was almost ready to punch him when he just said, I don't mean you any harm. And he laid his hand on my shoulder and started speaking in tongues. I did not know what to make of that. But within a few minutes, all I knew was that something overcame me. And I sat down. My shirt was bloody. My pants were already dirty. So I sat down on a dirty street gutter and bawled my eyes out. And he started talking to me about Christ and started talking to me about the Lord. And he gave me his old beat up ratty Bible, and I accepted the Lord.
Wow.
When I went home and told my mom, she slapped me without a single moment of hesitation. She slapped me in the face and said, "Don't try and pull that religion crap on me. You're in trouble, Bubba."
Oh.
So at that point, there was no church in my town that I could really go to. I hitchhiked a few times. It took about 5 hours to hitchhike across the desert and to get rides and to go to a little church called Protestant church called um, Calvary Chapel, which became kind of famous
Ah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
But that was not something I could do on a regular basis. And within 6 months, I had gotten my GED and decided to hitchhike to Tucson, Arizona, where I joined a Christian commune. And being dysfunctional as I was, and at the commune, because I was kind of ratty and I wore old secondhand clothes and I had kind of an attitude, and I had stopped taking drugs at that point, but I was still kind of a street kid in almost every other way. My nickname was Punk.
Oh.
So my first Christian nickname was Punk. But they loved me. They did it in a laughing, loving way. I didn't stay at the commune more than about 3 or 4 months because I just, that much interpersonal reaction, that much community, that much touching, all of that just set my my kind of um, phobias kind of on edge. And it wouldn't be until my 50s when I was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress from my childhood. And
Oh.
so I didn't know it at the time, but I was having real difficulty feeling, I felt I never could, I spent most of my life feeling like I didn't really belong anywhere. And because of that. But so I still kept going to the church, but I just couldn't live with all these lovey-dovey hippie people.
Mm.
And and I wound up. I served at a ministry to. I was a musician, so I served at a ministry to sing and serve meals to street people.
What
Which
decade is this, by the way? Which decade we're talking here?
this was back in the mid 70s. This was back in the
Wow.
70s.
Nice.
So I fed street people and sang songs, and ultimately I got married, and I wound up marrying a woman who came from an extremely wealthy family.
Ah.
And
Does
a
she have a
few years,
sister?
what's that?
Does she have a
She
sister?
has
I'm kidding. I'm already married. I'm happily married.
4 sisters, and they were all witches.
Oh.
Three other sisters, and they were all witches. They were
Oh.
all entitled little prima donnas, and for her to marry the street kid did not go well
Oh.
at
Oh.
all. I had married her just for her
Did
money,
they
and I
say who's this punk? And she said it's Punk.
yeah, that's me. That's long story short was, and I rarely tell this story to anyone anymore. I was working at the time. We got married. She got pregnant almost right away, and so I was a father. And I was working as a truck driver for produce company, and I'd get up at like 4 o'clock in the morning and have to be there at 5 a.m. I worked about a 12-hour day. I came home. I did that 6 days a week. By Sunday came along, I was just exhausted. And so we were in prayer one day to say, Lord, back then you don't, you're the man of the house, right? You don't really send your wife to work,
On
because
the street
that's your
corner?
job to take care of the family. So I
Yeah.
was saying, Lord, I just want to send her back to work for just a little while, just so I can quit my job long enough to find another job, because I can't go
Yeah.
find another job when I'm working these kind of hours. And it was one of the few times in my life I felt the Lord speak to me almost audibly and directly. He says, I want you to go to college.
Mhm.
I had never taken an SAT test. I didn't even pass high school. I didn't even take half of high school. I was functionally illiterate.
Mhm.
I was the punk. And I thought, where the heck did that come from? I said, I'm crossing signals with somebody else or something. I didn't, it was like, what? And I said, no, look, I want to send her back to school. Back to work because I need to get another job. I said, I can't afford to go to college. I can't even afford to support my family. And it was a few minutes later, I heard, it was like, I want you to get up right now and call the university and ask for an application. You are going to go to school.
Wow.
And I did. Now my wife's response was, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm calling the university. The Lord told me I'm supposed to go to college." She says, "You've got to be kidding me." and I didn't know anything. I didn't know what I was supposed to take. I didn't know anything. And I thought, well, this is just an exercise of faith, right? It's not going to come to anything. They're not. It's early August. The school starts in September. I said, there's no way I'm going to get into school. There's no way that I'm going to get. I don't even know if I have transcripts anymore. I was like, this was bizarre, and I thought this is crazy. And I said, well, it's an act of faith. I'm just supposed to do it, just so that the Lord could prove something to me, and then He's going to show me a job.
Like Isaac, when Abraham was to sacrifice Isaac, he was willing to go along. It didn't make sense, but he was willing to go along to see what miracle would happen.
Gideon basically said, get rid of the 300,000 men or 3,000 men, get down to 300. It was that. It's just absurd. Kind of little. I'm going to do this. It's going to happen so that you know that I did this.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that at the time. I thought this was just a joke. This was just the Lord making me do something, just to make me do something. And so I did. I got the application. I needed my wife's help to fill out the application. When it said declare a major, I thought, well, the Lord didn't tell me what I was supposed to study. So I did one of these, pointing,
Wow.
And electrical engineering.
Wow.
And I thought, well, this is crazy. They're never going to accept me for this. 2-3 weeks later, it wasn't really very long at all, I got an acceptance letter. They acknowledged that I was 24 units deficient of the minimum requirements, but that they would allow me to make up for it during my program. And I looked at that letter, and my first thought was, holy crap, I thought college was for smart people. They'll let any idiot in. I said, yeah, this really diminishes my view of college. But I thought, well, this is crazy. I still don't have the money. I still don't have tuition. I still don't have. I think it was like $5,000. It was really cheap back then, $5,000 a semester for tuition, which is nothing compared to what it is today. But for me, I was only making like 13, so a year. So that was like half a year's tuition of salary.
Yeah.
So there's no way. So I threw the letter in the trash, and I said, okay, Lord, now what? And during the process, I got my transcripts. I had to send in my transcripts. I got my transcripts, and I realized that I had already gone, by the time I dropped out of school in the 10th grade, I had already gone to 16 schools.
Wow.
I couldn't remember more than like 3 or 4. This was part of my PTSD amnesia. So I threw the letter in the trash. The very next day, now I hadn't told anybody I had done this because I was ashamed. I thought how ridiculous it was that a street punk like me could possibly go to college when he hadn't finished high school. I just thought this was just between me and God. It's just, Lord, it's just between you and me, right? My wife, she's not going to tell anybody because, she's embarrassed too. The very next day, I got a letter from my father-in-law. I've been thinking about you a lot. I think you've had a rough start in life. I think you have potential, and frankly, I don't think that you're able to to treat my daughter to, in the means that she deserves. I want you to consider going to college. And if you do, I know you don't have money. I'm willing to pay for your tuition and books, but you're still going to have to work to put food on the table. Nobody had ever offered me anything in life. I had been told from the time I can remember how stupid I was and how worthless I was, and my best chance at life would be to join a trade union and learn how to be a carpenter or something. I didn't know what to say. Except, is that letter still in the trash? I went to college. That's how I got into college. As you can imagine, it was hard. All of the reading, all of the studies, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. The electrical engineering stuff just blew me away from day one. I didn't know what I was doing there. But I felt that I had been sent there for a reason. And I didn't know what that reason was.
Were you tempted by the horny college girls or not so much?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. But while most of them were out partying on the weekends, I was working at night. My wife was anorexic, so I had to take care of our toddler child when I was home. I was studying my fanny off in every other time. So while I was tempted, I didn't have any real money. And you know, girls, they like you to spend money on them. I had no money and I had no time.
Yeah.
So while everybody else was driving to school in the cars that Daddy bought them, I was riding my bicycle.
Mm.
So the long story short, I graduated with multiple degrees. I graduated at the top of the dean's list. I won a full scholarship at that school in Arizona to basically go to grad school. I was also accepted into Harvard MBA program. And a lot of that was because I had developed, I ended up in economics, finance, computer science programs. And I had developed a macroeconomic computer model that outperformed the Federal Reserve and every other bank in the nation.
Wow.
By a margin.
Wow.
And because I had developed a theory about why all the other models were wrong, were missing something, missing a critical piece, my theory turned out to be right. It changed how everybody did computer modeling to this day.
Wow.
And I got a job at IBM, and that began the transformation of Guy. I spent 38 years in Fortune 100 leadership roles. I gained a reputation as a thought leader and innovator of leading edge technologies, looking at a new technology and saying, I could use that in the business to do this, that, and the other thing. I would often teach myself the technologies because I was in finance roles for the most part. So I wasn't really, they didn't even have computer departments back then. And most of them there was a data center in Tulsa or, off site someplace, and it was just a bunch of, and that I did major mergers and acquisitions, and I did $8 billion corporate restructurings, and I reorganized whole groups and departments. I modernized different groups and departments. I introduced internet technologies and networking technologies and artificial intelligence technologies and web technologies and desktop computer modeling for complex problems. But I never felt, I was working directly with vice presidents and CXOs. I never felt like I was one of them. I always in my mind felt that I was the poser. I was the street kid who somehow got lucky. And so I never bought into the entitlement, the greed, the hatred of taxation, and the despising of people who needed help in their education or, to put food on their tables, because I spent most of my life needing help putting food on the table and so there was always a part of me. Now, during that time, in order to kind of balance out all of the analytical baloney, I wrote songs for Disney. I recorded my own albums. I was a worship leader in Venice Beach, California, which is the craziest place in the world to lead worship. It's like leading worship at Burning Man. But I developed alcohol problems and drug problems and promiscuity problems and all kinds of other emotional dysfunctional problems because I never really dealt with my PTSD. I just kept thinking, well, that's behind me. My life has changed now. Why haven't I changed? And so I struggled for a few decades trying to get over all those things. And until one by one, I went to 12 steps. I went in prayer. One by one, I kind of dealt with them all. And the more I started studying scripture, the more I realized that I didn't necessarily agree with how churches, Catholic, Protestant, others were necessarily teaching scripture and practicing their religion. And that brings us up to the conversation we were having, which is the wide gap between faith and religion. And I think your comment was on religion is for people who really don't have much faith. And we started talking about the challenges within all religions to really the biases and the errors and the replacing faith with rituals, and that talking to people who are agnostic or maybe atheist, and how so many of them that I talk to are turned off by what they perceive as religion without understanding the difference between that and faith. And I went through periods of doubt with my own faith. And after seeing some of the dysfunction and cynicism and just biases and hypocrisies that I saw, that made me question. And I had to kind of reestablish my own faith through hard study and prayer and just and my own recovery and trying to understand how I was flawed. That didn't necessarily mean that the Lord was flawed, and that other people were flawed, and that's what kind of contributed to some of those hypocrisies. And that my judgment needed to focus on me, not others, and that and I started looking at even aspects of the Protestant church. I would like the Christian, the whole tendency now towards Christian nationalism of certain churches. I see through that to see really the political and the hypocrisy and the
worldliness,
world vision and world greediness of power. It's a power play. And so that began my own transformation. And as I went through my career, there's a few things that happened in my career that kind of changed me. One of the things that happened that changed me the most actually was part of the inspiration for my books that came later in life. So I'll stop there and maybe let's ask questions. But sure. I just want to make sure that I knew you wanted to kind of get a up till now thing, and so maybe I'll give you one more story and then I'll get you up to now. Because of my ability to kind of look at broad things of data and look at things in an analytical way, I would listen to people who were teaching about prophecy and end times and things like that. And in my ear, I kept hearing biases. I heard religious bias. It's the Protestants against the Catholics, the Pope's the Antichrist. It's the Christians against the Muslims, the Ayatollahs, the Antichrist. And I would hear all of these other things that kind of merged in cultural biases and prosperity doctrines and all of these things. I kept thinking all of those things are wrong. That's not what I'm reading. That's not what I'm seeing. But I was struggling to understand what those things meant, because I honestly wanted to understand. Some people said we were living. There was a book series called what was it? Left Behind. Left Behind series.
Oh yeah.
Came out in the 70s, and a lot of people saying we're in the end times. And I said, well, is this just? It's just people reacting to the fact that we're in a volatile, rapidly changing time period, which we've had several of, or are we really there? And if so, what does that imply to me about how I should approach my own faith? And I was reading a National Geographic article one day. In the National Geographic article, was talking about the loss of fish stocks around the world. Every major fishing ground around the whole world was depleting their fish stocks. It was because of pollution and overfishing and all of these other things, but it was, the fact is that they were measuring it, and they're all down by 30% ish or more. And it triggered in my head. I said, wait a minute, there's a prophecy in Revelations called the Seven Trumpets that has an allegory. The allegory is a flaming rock falls from the sky, lands in the ocean, and then an outcome. The outcomes are a third of the fish of the sea die, a third of the birds of the air die, a third of the beasts of the land die, and 2/3 of the rivers are so polluted you can't drink from them. And I realized I was involved in environmental issues at an oil company at the time. We had all of those things, that the outcomes had already occurred, and I could document that they had occurred. And I started thinking about the probability of those occurrences minus an asteroid or some other major geologic event. And so I thought, well, I'm a computer modeler. I could model this. I could gather some prophecies. I could gather some documentation and some reliable data on whether those things had occurred or not occurred. I could calculate the individual probabilities, and I could come up with a calculation of the cumulative probabilities. And so I could come up with correlation analysis and regression analysis to say what possibly could come next, and a number of other things. I said, well, I'm gonna model this. And so I did. I spent a really long weekend. My son, I was a single parent at that point. I'd lost my first marriage and I was divorced. But it was a long weekend, and at work I had access to. We were an oil company, so we had millions of years of geologic data. I went to the library and got history books and science books and a back of other data that I could put into the model. And I spent an entire weekend modeling this out. And the outcome at 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday night was 1.4 trillion to 1 that we had entered in prophetic times. Now I thought, either my math is really wrong, I'm really tired and I did something, I made a mistake in my data input, or I need to reconsider my career, my life, and my walk. And that was one of the defining events of my life. I still had to work, I still had to have a career, but I decided I didn't want to work for an oil company at that point. So I wound up moving to tech companies, some startups, some internet companies, and ultimately Oracle and Microsoft, where I got introduced into AI and early AI, and there were some other events that were major events. But I retired about 6 years ago, about 2019. I guess it wasn't 6 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and decided that as for my third act career, I wanted to write books. For me, I love thrillers. Dan Brown, Michael Crichton, James Rollins, Steve Berry, Raymond Curry, stories that integrate real history, real technology, real science, real organizations and events and conspiracies, but in a plot format that makes you want to have to turn the page to figure out what's going to happen next and how is this going to end, but firmly rooted in factual information. And so I decided to do thrillers, and my thrillers would integrate two major themes, artificial intelligence, and then end time prophecy. With the premise that an artificial intelligence has decoded end time prophecy. And so in a way where I'm not really taking it from a religious perspective, I'm taking it from this more analytical perspective, and the characters in the story are somewhat agnostic, and they're trying to figure out what all this means. And so as this series goes through, they're kind of watching events, real-time events unfold. I'm telling those real-time events from real-time, current events from from around the world, and relating those to a prophetic way, but within a thriller format. So far, the first book in the series won a gold award for Reader's Favorite. The second book in the series just won the silver award for Reader's Favorite. The third book that I have published has nothing to do with that series. That was a completely different thread. That one was listed as BookTrib's favorite 25 books of 2021. They called it Indiana Jones Meets Da Vinci Code. So I'm enjoying my new life, but I feel like I have a little bit of a mission, which is trying to help people who are agnostic or atheist or who don't have a faith or a scriptural or a spiritual foundation to understand that we're living in a time, all of these signs are a warning for us to say this, this is our opportunity to change our priorities and to change our hearts.
Very cool. Thank you for all that. Well said. I only have one question for you. Are you
Only one.
are you a compulsive liar? Yes or no? It's too unbelievable. It's too unbelievable.
No,
It's a
no,
joke.
I'm
It's
not
a
a
joke. It's a
compulsive
joke.
liar.
It's a joke. It's a joke.
I'm a deep down nerd. I'm a
Have you?
complete nerd.
But it's funny because if you do meet a compulsive liar, they can weave stories like ridiculous stories like yours. I do believe you, by the way. I do believe you, just so you know. I'm just being funny. I'm just being silly. But
No,
I'm sure that if you could see the thought bubble above the head of people that are hearing your story for the first time, I would say 90% will think, this is too much. This is too wild. This is too crazy, especially if they don't believe in God.
well, especially, well, I'd say do the math. Do the math. Find out, do your own probability analysis and find out, look at a number of prophecies, understand. I came to understand a number of things. First off, that many of the biases that I was listening to came from interpreting the allegory.
Oh.
And that if I could ignore the allegory for the most part and focus on outcomes or attributes, I could actually attribute those attributes in a very logical way to factual events and factual things. And for me, that was my aim. I'm a doubting Thomas, and so my Thomas in me said, well, I need to see some sort of evidence or proof. And the training that I'd had from college gave me the tools I needed to create that evidence or proof. And so that's the approach that I took. I didn't want to take a hyper religious perspective. I didn't want to where it was like, well, that's not what my religion says, and so I want to disagree. I tried to take it from here's a prophecy that talks about an outcome. Here's a recent event that actually completes that outcome. You draw your own conclusion.
Have you ever had dreams? Have you ever had dreams where you thought maybe it was from God?
A few.
Yeah.
But I for many years I had chronic problems sleeping in general.
Oh.
I would have frequent nightmares and all of that. Both of those things were part of my PTSD. But I've had a few dreams, and that I ultimately, I didn't know at the time, I've ultimately attributed them to God.
Okay.
But they were more personal about just me,
your path,
and my that I am saved by grace, not by anything I could possibly do.
Yeah. That's what we believe, by the way. That is what we believe. It's all grace, sola gratia.
All grace.
What about your? I want to just touch back on the biographical stuff, just a minute, briefly, and we'll move on.
Sure.
There's so much to dig into here. But I'm curious about your ex-wife, how she's doing. Is she still Christian? Are your kids Christian? Are you, what's the story in the family generally? Parents and siblings? Do you have siblings? What's the story there?
My ex-wife grew up Presbyterian. She actually converted to Catholicism.
Oh, no way.
After the divorce, several years after the divorce. My children are somewhat would call themselves Christian, but they're not really attending church and not practicing. My second wife is Christian. She's an angel. Everybody loves my wife.
How'd you meet her?
And that's why I have friends.
How'd you meet the second wife?
I was a worship leader in Venice, and I had gone through a period of promiscuity, and I was actually trying to pull back and say this isn't. I was feeling very convicted. It was leading to a lot of heartbreak, leading to a lot of troubles. And so I was at a stage where I just wasn't going to date. I had decided that I was brilliant on some things. Picking a good woman was not one of my things. I really was bad with relationships and trust. I am bluntly honest, and not every woman can deal with that. And so I had decided, I was a single parent. I was living on a boat, a big sailing cutter, and I was a worship leader. So my son and I had gone to a potluck for the church. That's somebody's house, a friend of ours, and I there was this cute redhead sitting across from me, and we were just talking, just not flirting, just talking about different things. Really lovely, lovely woman. And there was a guy standing behind her, and I figured that was her husband because he followed her everywhere she went, but he never said anything. And honestly, our first thought was, wow, she's really adorable. He's whipped. And so, and I hadn't really noticed her before, but then like a week or so after that, I was playing and I noticed her sitting in the church. It was this little tiny 1920s, little tiny hole in the wall chapel a block off the beach. And so we'd get all kinds of people going to the beach, hearing the music coming in. So the back two rows were people in bathing suits. It was back to church. But I noticed her, but she was with a different guy. I thought, oh, that's strange. And so a couple of weeks later, I noticed her again, and she's with even a different guy. I said, oh, that's odd. And about the third guy, I went to some friends that I had at the church that knew her. And I said, so what's the deal with Darcy? And I said, does her husband mind that she comes to church with all these other men? Oh, Darcy's not married. And they lean in really, the woman leans in really tight. She, with a big smirky smile, says, she's available. I said, well, apparently so. And so now I asked on a routine basis, I asked people to go sailing with me because it was a beautiful boat. I love to sail. It's nice to have company. And so I wound up seeing her a few minutes after that. I said, well, listen, I'm going to go sailing next Saturday. Why don't you come along, bring a boyfriend, bring a girlfriend, bring a lunch. We leave at 10. I'll see you there. And as it turned out, she was the only one. She and her girlfriend were the only two that showed up that day. So I spent the entire day with them sailing. And then I decided to make them both dinner that night. And we wound up dating. Now, a couple of weeks later, I'm starting to realize that she's a really incredibly wonderful, sweet. She's an angel, and I don't deserve the angel. I'm still in my head. I'm the street punk. And so I sat her down. And I said, listen, I got to tell you. I said, I don't know that we should really keep seeing each other. And it's not that I don't want to. But you got to know. And I told her about my addictions and my childhood and my issues with my sleep and my blah, 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 blah. I just dumped my junk thinking she's going to run. This will be the last time I ever see her again. She has a thing for stray cats. I became her ultimate stray cat. 3 months later, we're bike riding along the beach. We continue to see each other. And we stopped along one of the little cafes along the beach path to have an iced tea because we were hot and we just wanted to cool down and people watch. And I'm sipping my iced tea and I'm in the middle of a sip and she leans over and she says, so when I ask you to marry me, are you going to know what you're going to say? I freaked out. I choked on my tea. I'm coughing like crazy as if I've just lost it all completely. I can't get a hold of my breath. I'm just grabbing the table, just pounding my chest, coughing, trying to get over this. The guy behind me leans back and he says, smooth, dude. And she says, well, you don't have to answer now. I just want you to be thinking about it so that you're ready. That was the beginning of the end. 3 months after that, we got married, which was another completely hilarious story I won't go into this time. But it's been 30 years. And we're actually having our 30th anniversary this month. And she's the angel. I still didn't deserve the angel, but God decided that I was going to get one anyway.
Cool. That's a nice story. Yeah, it's beautiful. So I'm just wondering, I have a question from the live chat, actually. I have a lot of listeners, but there's a question here. He asks, when your heart was purified, was that the beginning of your wisdom? Is there a connection between purity of heart and sort of the wisdom, and I guess the intelligence too.
Well, I never realized I was intelligent until I started creating models that other people hadn't. It still took me a number of years before I accepted the fact that I had a pretty high IQ, because I in my head I kept thinking I'm just a dumb kid who got lucky. My IQ, I decided at one point to take some IQ tests, and they came out quite high. And I decided to even test that. I actually went out and got stoned and retook the test. They came out. Um,
You took
I
the high
still
Q. You took the
trouble
high
typing.
Q test. That's called the high Q test.
A high Q test, exactly.
You can use that.
But it wasn't. There was a correlation between cleaning up my act and getting rid of some of the addictions and some of the promiscuity, and starting to refocus my to stop trying to get the world to fill that void that sense of worthlessness that I continued to feel, and started just trying to be more obedient and trying to understand scripture. And there was a wisdom that did come with that, for sure. Because I was too focused. I wasn't focused on the right things. It wasn't until I could clear up all those other things that I could focus on what the scripture was saying, what I was seeing, and that get those perceptions. Because I had to sober up to see those things. And so there definitely was a correlation there. I think that, and humility, I can't stress that part enough. The willingness to say, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should test this. Maybe I should check it out. Maybe I should go back and read more. Maybe I should go back and study more. Maybe I'm wrong. And be willing to admit that I'm flawed, and that maybe I'm getting an insight. Maybe I'm just full of myself. Mm-hmm. And let's accept that either possible. It's like Schrodinger's cat. We don't know if I'm right or I'm full of myself until we actually do the work and we got in the box.
Yeah. When I met my wife, one thing I noticed is I was a late bloomer. I was like a virgin till my early 20s, and not by choice, but not because I was a good boy, but just because I was a loser. But I could never sleep comfortably with a woman. I couldn't sleep. I was too nervous. So one of the things I noticed with my soulmate when I met her at university is we would just fall asleep. Even sitting on the veranda out front in front of my house, we would just be comfortable and fall asleep. And she noticed too. She said, "This is very unusual that I'm this comfortable with you. This is very unusual." And I said, "Same for me." So I'm wondering if you're sleeping better now that you found your soulmate.
Yes, actually, as a matter of fact, I still occasionally will have a nightmare, when I'm troubled and I have something on my mind or something's bothering me. I found that my sleep has gotten better once I was diagnosed with the PTSD, and I could start dealing with those demons and understanding where they came from and how to deal with them. That was a major break for me, because up until that point, I turned all my other isms into workaholism.
Yeah.
I always chose the job that was the high stress, high performance job, convincing myself that I was probably one of the only people who could do it, because I wouldn't stop working until all that kind of stuff. But yeah, between my wife and finally addressing the coming to grips with and being honest about the traumas and their effect on me, has helped my sleep a lot for a long time. But I have to take prescription sleep medication, because I will work to about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I have to work. It doesn't matter how tired my body is, until my mind shuts off. I can't sleep. And even then, if I don't take prescription medication, I will wake up in 2 or 3 hours just churning on something. And it's that hyper anxiety that's still, it's just part of it. So I still have some sleep issues, and the medications dampen my ability to remember my dreams more often than not.
I see. Okay, okay.
So
How many?
it's actually helped. That's a
Yeah.
good thing, you know. No
How
one
many?
wants to have bad dreams and then remember them afterwards.
No. How many hours a night on average in this phase of your life? Is it 4, 5, 6, 7?
Well, now I'm getting about 6. For a long time, it was no more than 4. I couldn't go more than 4 without waking up and just not being able to sleep at all.
What's the connection
Um,
that you've discovered between genius and madness and insomnia and all these sorts of things and neuroses and psychoses? Because it's often that they're clumped together, the geniuses of music or art or whatever, they're a little bit special and sometimes they can have a dark side or whatever. So what have you seen in your analysis of genius? Not to say that you're a genius, maybe you are, but what do you see in that vein?
um, wow, that's the way you put that. Let me try to say I've most often associated my insomnia with my traumas.
Okay.
But I will admit that oftentimes when I can't sleep, it's because I'm churning on a problem. I'm churning on something in my head, whether it was a problem at work, a problem in my life, a problem with the world, a problem with my book. It doesn't matter. My head will churn, and so my wife will frequently tell me that in any other age I would be considered the mad scientist. I get to in phases where I'm so locked in on something where it's like I don't want to eat. I just throw the food under the door. I'll get to it when I get to it. I can't stop. On my head's on this problem. Don't bother me. I'm in the middle of something, so maybe there is a correlation to the overactive thought processes. I don't know. One of the other key things that kind of fed into my books and kind of changed me a little bit was years ago. Now I had to work with our early stages of artificial intelligence in my business, and we didn't even call it AI back then. It had a different term. Um, and I worked with. I'm not an architect. I never worked as an architect, technology architect, but I worked with them all the time. I worked with other. I considered myself fortunate because I got to work with other geniuses, people who really were geniuses, and I got to interact with them all the time. Some of them I used to call, my nickname for them was intellectual espresso. Um, just they would go so fast. I'd be like, hold on, pause the tape. I got to write this down. Um, but there was a point in time when I had discovered through an obscure means that a program, and this is all true, I'm not lying about this one either, that a program had escaped the NSA spy labs at the Lawrence Livermore Labs at Sandia. Escape was their word. I was upset. I get obsessed about certain things, and I became obsessed with that. I spent almost a year trying to figure out how NSA could architect and code and design a program that it could have that capability. So when I figured out how a program could escape NSA, and then I spent more time trying to figure out, well, what did they want that program? If I'm put on my best James Bond, Q, NSA, CIA spy mentality about thinking about the enemy in the world, what would I want my program to do that needed that stealth technology? Because escaped implied a number of things. It implied some level of intelligence or design. It implied the ability to move itself, and they implied the ability to erase the computer log trails so that the NSA didn't know where it went or how to find it. That's pretty special technology. So when I figured all that out, I produced a webisode series that was an espionage webisode series. One of my dear friends was a producer. So we said, well, rather than doing this as a film script or anything else, let's test out the idea and let's do it as a webisode series. Hugely popular, won a bunch of awards, got a film studio to license the option that the show, and then came and knocked on my door from 2 FBI agents. Apparently, they were a little upset that I had figured out something they thought was supposed to be top secret, and even more upset that I had produced a webisode series talking about this escaped program. And what bothered them the most was my snarky attitude. Yes, 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 I did it. I figured it out. You guys wouldn't be here if I'd gotten this wrong. Oh man, this is so cool. I'm going to tell all my friends that you showed up. Hey, let me see your badges again. I got the "we're not amused, we do not have a sense of humor" speech. And then my wife came home. She pulls me aside. Honey, there's 2 FBI agents in our dining room. I'm pretty sure it's not a social call. What did you do? So I got I said, just my normal geekness. And so that program became the inspiration for my espionage books, where the program had decoded end time prophecy. And so it raised my awareness. It connected me, because we all grew up with this thing of America's good, and we have, the CIA or protect, we all had the spies are cool. There's cool spies and there's evil spies, but we're the cool guys and we're the good guys. And it connected me with the idea that the technologies that we were developing on a commercial level had non-commercial purposes that I had never really spent time considering how those technologies could be used and for what reasons. And so that was another part of that process to get me in touch with prophecy and technology and artificial intelligence and all of that stuff. And again, that was that revelation that made me start thinking that while I was working for a technology company, maybe I didn't want to put my faith in the technology, but I should put my faith in God. And so it was just one of those major steps, but it became part of that journey for me to end up as an author.
A friend of mine asked me, thank you for all that, by the way, it's fascinating. A friend of mine asked me, not here in the live chat, but on another chat, my private chat on my Gmail, he asked me about Romans 11 and all the Jews are going to come in the end time. There's a partial hardening that's come upon the Jews who rejected their Messiah, but once the full number of Gentiles come in, then all the Jews are going to come in. It's one of my favorite passages in all of the New Testament. I'm just wondering, because of what's happening in the Middle East now, and because of end times prophecy and your modeling, and because you're a little bit eccentric, what you think about Romans 11?
Just a little, just a little. Well, I certainly see it as a. I don't think we're at Armageddon yet, but it certainly could become the flashpoint that becomes that kind of scenario. We're at about that right time. There's a number of things that have been going on behind the surface that I'm not sure if your listeners are aware of or not. One of them is that Israel, in order to start their sacrifices, needed a red heifer, and the red heifer that they had, they've actually found the red heifer. It actually came to maturity this month. And it was the Sanhedrin has postponed the sacrificial process because of the Gaza war. And I've heard some analysts suggest that Iran got the Hamas to basically start this conflict in order to keep that from happening. So that's just statistically speaking, and probability speaking, that's a very rare event. Those are very rare. Completely red heifer at 3 years is very rare, which is why it's taken them 70 years to find one. And that's an interesting event to happen while all these other things are happening. Another thing that people are probably less aware of is that there's roughly half of the prime ministers that have led Israel since it was refounded, which its founding, by the way, was one of the prophecies I looked at, that had any time in history had there been any instance where a world body got together and decided to send the remnants of a people back to their homeland and give them their homeland back. That's a singular event in all of human history. Now, whether you agree with the decision, whether you
I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it. I'm anti-Zionist. I'm very anti-Zionist. But it's not based on research. It's not based on anything but a hunch. So I might be wrong, but my hunch is it's wrong.
your hunch may be right, and I'm going to explain to you why. So what I can say is that the fact that it happened, whether or not you agree that it should have happened, you agree with how Israel has treated their newfound statehood and treated the Palestinians well or not, it's regardless. As an event, it was a singular event in all of human history, and so it had a very, very low probability of occurring, and we don't think it would ever occur again. Now, what most people don't know is that roughly half of the prime ministers that have ruled over Israel since its formation were high degree Freemasons.
Ooh.
And that there is a Freemason, I would call it even an Illuminati temple in the heart of Israel, designed, paid, and erected by Jacob Rothschild. It has a 33-degree level pyramid with an all-seeing eye. It has an inverted cross that you're meant to walk on. It has an Egyptian obelisk with some writing on it that no one can read.
In Jerusalem? This is in Jerusalem?
In the very heart of Tel Aviv. Okay. It's actually, and I feature that in my last book, The Last Ark. And so there is I believe that there's a hardness to the heart. There is the scripture talks about those that call themselves Jews, but they are not, right?
Carnal Jews, the carnal Jews.
Carnal Jews. And those are the people like Netanyahu that are running Israel today. And I believe it's that hardness that's created this inhumane treatment of others to their own, sense of persecution, right, as an excuse. So I think that your gut feel of anti-Zionism, which is their political structure. Not
I got nothing against the Jews. Nothing against the Jews. I love the Jews. I love those who fear God.
Do too. I love those who fear God. All of our prophets, all of it comes from their heritage. There's a spiritual Jew, and then there's a carnal Jew. Yeah. What we're seeing is the carnality, and it's demonstrated by the fact that this temple that I told you about is their Supreme Court building. Now, you go 30 steps up into this kind of blinding light, the way they architected it, to get to the 30th level. At the 30th level, there's a library that has 3 levels. It's a legal library. Lawyers and judges can go on the first level. Only current level judges can go in the second level, but only retired judges and 33-degree Masons are allowed on the 3rd level of this library.
Which is the 33rd step.
The 33rd step. Now, a couple of other facts. The reason I called the book The Last Ark, there are more, what some don't realize is there was more than one Ark of the Covenant made. The first one made by Moses is technically called the Ark of Testimony. Now, in the according to scripture in the second book of Maccabees, that ark went missing at the Babylonian invasion. So according to the second book of Maccabees, which we don't really study in the Christian circles,
Protestant circles,
Jeremiah's scribe Barak and 5 other temple priests hid billions, what we would consider billions of dollars of temple treasure. And Jeremiah hid the Ark of Testimony made by Moses on Mount Nebu, which is on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. Now, in the 1960s, there was a copper scroll found outside of Qumran, which is where all the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. That copper scroll, it took them years to unravel it without breaking it and decipher it. And it essentially, long story short, was a treasure map. It had 64 locations where these temple priests basically hid all the treasures of Israel. And in the 64th location is a second copper scroll, and that describes where to find that second copper scroll that will describe where Jeremiah hid the Ark of Testimony made by Moses. Now, for years, people have been looking for these locations because they saw it as a treasure map. They wanted to find the treasure of Solomon. Everybody failed. 6 years ago, a guy named, I'm going to have a mental block on his name, decoded all 64 locations underneath the ruins of Qumran itself. He went to the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish priesthood for the temple and the sacrifices, convinced them that he was onto something. They went to the Israeli Archaeology and Antiquities Group, who went out and did a metal scan over each of these 64 locations and confirmed non-ferrous metals under every single one of them. They dug down one spot only 2 feet, even though the scroll said to dig down essentially equivalent of 9 to 12 feet. And then they basically covered it up, said there's nothing here, there's nothing to think, it's a false lead. Well, the reason they did that is because Qumran is part of the Palestinian West Bank. By law, they cannot dig and keep what they find there. Everything they find would go into this military tribunal warehouse, governed in part by Jordan, where they would never see these treasures again. It was about that time that Netanyahu started talking consistently about a single state solution. Why? Because under a single state solution, they would have the ability to go dig up their treasures of Qumran.
Wow.
Now there's a second ark. Now, and many people some of your listeners might know about the ark that was in Ethiopia. That ark is actually based on true history. There's a lot of documentation, a lot of history, a lot of archaeology that went along with that.
It's in a small building, right? And people don't really go in there, right, to see it?
That's right. It has actually left Israel 2,600 years ago. It was on Elephantine Island in the Nile River, which completed a prophecy by Isaiah, and basically that the testimony of God would exist in Egypt for a time, and there would be sacrifices there. The Romans chased it out of Egypt in the 2nd century. It went to synagogues in Ethiopia until the Templars came in and took the ark and put it in Christian churches. And it's been in this one church for over 600 years, called the Chapel of Tablets. And there's a guy called the Guardian who basically spends his entire life living in that chapel, never leaving the grounds of that chapel, protecting the ark. January 21, the ark was stolen and sold on the black market after 750 men, women, and children were massacred trying to protect it.
Is this in the news?
It never hit the U.S. news. I found it because I was researching the ark for my research for my books and prophecy, and I was trying to deal with the temple and the idea that the temple isn't complete without an ark. And so I was trying to understand if the ark still existed. And that's when I discovered this. It was basically the Ethiopian press. Some international press covered it. But, Western society doesn't give two craps on a foggy day about Africa, and so 750 people losing their life in Africa is no big deal when Ethiopia is having a civil war. But I had to sit down and say, now, I wanted to understand. I came up with a theory, I could be wrong, of who would have the money, the power, and the interest to own an ancient artifact of the Jewish people, and why hasn't it come to light since? And I won't tell you too much more because that's in my book.
Wow.
There are two Arks of the Covenant, but I will say that, again, if I think in terms of probabilities, that after 2,600 years, after all of these other things are occurring, during all of these other low probabilities events that tell us we're in the end times, it's ironic that then it's just only recently that both Arks of the Covenant, both of them came out of Israel, both of them were used in sacrifice, both of them would be needed in order to restart the sacrifice in Israel. Both of them have come to light in news stories over the last 5 or 6 years that were never covered in the U.S. press.
Wow. A lot of the time, if you look at history, you discover that there was a big picture that the local people, the regular people at the time, had no idea what the big power players were doing. And, there's always talk on the street level to justify this move or that move. It's like doing armchair football or hockey, where you sit back and say, well, they must be doing this tactic for this reason. But your speculation might hit sometimes, but there's more going on than you're aware of. And it's the same thing with politics. Like, a lot of the time, I'm very skeptical about what we're being told. Obviously, I'm skeptical about what we're being told. And, Russia, Ukraine, and all that. And, I'm very suspicious. And with Israel, of course, I'm very suspicious. So it's insights like this, which I don't want to run headlong down the rabbit hole and say, oh, I met this guy and he told me the absolute truth.
Join me down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. But what I can take from it is I can say, well, maybe it's interesting, And it's something like that that's happening. Because, if we look at the Old Testament, there was a lot of intrigue in the book of Maccabees. The first and second of Maccabees are very interesting for looking at politics and shifting alliances and these sorts of things. And all of the Old Testament is full of this sort of intrigue. And even if we get into World War II and the Nazis and Hitler, and that's a sort of a taboo subject to dig too much into
Right.
that. But I'm just wondering if you think that the Jews are going to come back in, at the end, as St. Paul says, and what does that mean? Like, who is a Jew? Like, is Woody Allen going to be? Is he going to become a Christian, or is it only those who fear God who are going to come back into Christianity? Because we're the wild branches grafted onto the natural olive tree that is, the chosen people. So how do you reconcile all that? Do you have a strong theory about that?
I some of I've gotten to know some Messianic Jews.
Okay.
And these are some of the most sincere, incredibly knowledgeable, wonderful Christians that you could ever meet.
They're fulfilled Jews.
But they're fulfilled Jews. But there's not many of them, and they are persecuted in Israel and elsewhere.
Oh, yeah?
Because they're not really accepted into the Christian community fully. They're not accepted in the Jewish community fully. And so I think the number of 144,000 is sort of a analogy number. It's a sign of completeness, 12 by 12 type of thing. And so I think but I think that there is a remnant of the Jewish people who, and it's only been a more recent phenomenon since Israel became a nation and Jews have really been trying to seek their own identity, that many of them have been converting to Christ. And so I do think that again, you have to separate, just as we have to separate in religion. There are some people we see, and no offense for your Catholic faith, we've seen priests and cardinals abuse children and women and never confess or repent. We see the same thing with Jews. We see the same thing with with Christians and Protestant Christians. We see these very racist and hate-filled Protestant Christians who feel entitlement. We can't look at the religion itself. We see Islamic people. I've worked over the years with some really incredibly sweet, sincere, peaceful Muslims. And then we see terrorists, and we sometimes want to group the entire religion in with the worst people of that with that label, and we can't. We have to try to do the best of our ability to bring ourselves to where we're in repentance and we're in a good place with God by looking at our own flaws and dealing with those first. Forgiving others of their own flaws and loving everyone regardless of their flaws. But God says, man looks on the outward appearance, God looks on the heart. And this is a perfect example of that, where I think that what Netanyahu and the IDF are doing to the citizens of Gaza is inhumane, cruel, unnecessary, and will only make the problem worse.
Yeah.
That does not mean there are not good Jews out there who agree with that and who feel that this is wrong, who don't agree with Netanyahu, and even to the extent where there are Jews that are Christian Jews that are really following their faith, both their traditional and their newfound faith in Christ with equal fervor.
Yeah.
And so we really have to look at the people of faith being different than the people of a religion or the people of a heritage, because there's really God does not consider the heritage or the people, he considers the individual. Yeah. And that's where our hearts should be.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. There's a problem, I'm not shy to say it, Islam is a false religion, but there are many beautiful truths in it, many beautiful people, that have faith in God. And same with Judaism. It's a false religion today. They prophesied the Messiah and then they rejected him. I mean, many accepted them and they became the Christians. But this is not to disparage other worldviews, but it's only Christianity that's true. It's the only way. Christ is the only way. So this is not to put anyone down. It's just the fact. It's reality. And so,
a Jew who accepts Christ is just as right, because our heritage rests on that faith.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we can't reject that faith. Now, I would agree that Islam is a deviation of the faith. It's a false religion. But even in Islam, and many people may not realize this, they actually speak of Jesus and Mary.
Yeah.
And they actually revere them. Now, they don't revere Jesus as the Son of God, which is their mistake, but they do have a respect and reverence for Jesus. In Islam, and you'll read this in my book, The Last Ark, as well, they even have their own version of a Messiah and an Antichrist. And so those prophecies, if I look at the world today, those prophecies are coming true alongside. When I tried to kind of look at prophecy, I tried to not only include just biblical prophecy, I actually started studying, other prophecies as well, and trying to figure out where the correlations were and where they weren't. Mayan prophecy came up in my book, The Curse of Cortez. I haven't written about the Hopi prophecies because, frankly, that's one I really haven't quite deciphered yet. But Islam, Christianity, Jewish prophecies, all of them have prophecies of the end of this age and the coming of the next age, the spiritual age. Yeah. And so I tried to understand where they differed and where they were aligned, and try to again, knowing that God loves people, He's going to try and reach people in the language and in the voice that they understand. And I believe that He's given each of them an insight as to where we're going, and to not put their faith in this world, but to put their faith beyond. Now, I think Christ is our ticket to salvation. I think He's our Redeemer, but primarily for His sacrifice, but also in His example of how He lived and how He treated others of different faith, how He would treat the Samaritan, how He would treat the Roman, how He would treat those who came to Him believing in Him. And I think that was important.
Do you remember?
But
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Do you remember in the New Testament? Maybe you'll tell me who said it and where it was prophesied, in a general way that the time is coming when they're going to kill the Christians and think they're doing the will of God. Do you remember that passage as I paraphrased it?
Yeah.
Was it Jesus who said that, or Paul?
I think that was Jesus that said that. And I think He was saying it to the disciples of the time. And in fact, within a generation after His death, that was actually the truth and the reality. So He was telling them that you're believing in Me, but many of you are having to die for your faith.
But what I'm trying to connect that to, today, where a lot of evangelical Christians in America want to hasten the end times. They want to hasten all the the prophecies in what's going to happen in Jerusalem. They want to get that temple, the third temple or whatever it is, built, and they want to get the show on the road. And I feel like they're forcing God's hand a bit. And a lot of the time, when people they're not really trusting in God, they might be a little bit anxious to help God along a bit. I'm very cautious about that. I'm
cautious as well. And I think it's a reality of what's going to happen and what is happening. And so you're right. Many of them, but they're doing so with a misinterpretation of what the prophecies are saying. They're trying to say, well, first off, problem one is they think America is different than all the other countries. God loves America and He doesn't love everybody else. That's false. I would actually argue, and I would make the argument, that America is part of the beast with the 7 heads, 10 horns, and 10 crowns. Absolutely. And so we're one of the beast systems. We're part of the beast systems.
And Canada's a little mini beast.
Canada's one of the horns. Canada's one.
Yeah.
And so that's their first thing that's wrong. The second thing is the idea that God's going to come and set up this Christian world that's going to dominate over everything. And I don't read scriptures that way. I read that God's going to come. He's going to destroy this world. There will be a new heaven and a new earth. Yeah. And all that will pass away. And that, to me, speaks of some sort of ultimate destruction of what exists in order for God to create something new. Now, how that comes, what that exactly is going to look like, I don't know, because I don't think prophecy, this is the third thing that I think they try to do. They try to use prophecy to predict the future.
Oh, dangerous.
I think prophecy's better used to understand the present,
Mm.
to know where we're at. And I think that many of the reason why there's 800 plus, some say 850, I haven't counted that many, but there's hundreds of prophecies around the end times, even more prophecies around the end times than there
Yeah.
were about the coming of Christ.
Yeah.
Because it's our warning signs to say, as you start to see these things, knowing that we would be a generation that's distracted by television and music and radio and internet, pornography, and blah, 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 that we needed multiple signs in order to get our attention. I believe that a lot of these prophecies, I believe end time prophecies are broken up into two phases: signs of the times, and then the tribulation. I believe most of what we've seen up till now have been signs of the times. I believe we're now starting into the phase of tribulation.
Yeah. I want to ask you something controversial, and
Sure.
I've been getting flags on YouTube for expressing my opinion about it, but we'll try to couch the language delicately if you can.
Mhm.
But there was a certain ailment that was going around a few years ago, and they wanted us to get, and my Pope even wanted me to get a certain thing for that ailment, and I refused. I'm just wondering, without getting me booted off of YouTube, what did you think of that era? It was a worldwide thing. It
Pandemic,
swept the
sure.
world. Yeah, it swept the world.
Well, let me put it this way: the prophecy of the seven seals. One of the, I think it was the fourth seal. I may be remembering my seals incorrectly, but I think it was the fourth. Was a pestilence. Now, if I look historically, we've had certain plagues that have affected the world. The most devastating one was the Black Plague. It annihilated almost 50% of the population of Europe. But it was primarily a Europe and Eastern Asian, to some extent, a little bit North Africa, but it was primarily isolated to that one geography. Then the next big plague was the Spanish flu in 1917.
Mm.
That one also killed, I think, 10 or 15 million people. Not quite as deadly as the Black Plague, but it still killed a lot of people. And out of that came World War One, as was one of the ramifications out of that. But again, that was never felt in Asia. That was never felt in Latin America, Africa. That was primarily an America, Europe kind of thing. North America, Europe kind of thing. It didn't seem to have the same effect. I can say that COVID is the first time we've ever had a global pandemic that killed. We count the number of peoples, but we also have to realize that we saw news stories of mass graves where they had stopped counting because they just didn't. A lot of places around the world didn't have the capability to track the count, much less bury the people. That killed tens of millions, at least 10 million. But it was the first time that we've had any kind of disease that shut the world economy down, that affected every nation on the planet to some degree or another. I think there were a few isolated. There were some of the Polynesian islands when they shut down travel. They got off a little bit. They did have a few cases, but they got off relatively scot-free. But it's the only time in all of history that we can look at where we've had a pestilence, some sort of disease that affected everyone. Now, whether that's part of scripture or not, I can only say that it's during these prophetic times that it happened, that it had ramifications in terms of national security and economics that was also part of the seven seals. And so I make the argument that it was part of the seven seals. Whether you should have gotten a shot, whether you believe in vaccines, whether you don't believe in the vaccines, that's up to you. That's a personal choice. Me, I'm an old guy. I'm 67 years old.
Oh yeah, you look great.
Thank you. My wife has a mother-in-law. My mother-in-law lives very close by. My wife sees her. She's not the best of health.
Yeah.
I decided that for the love of others,
Yeah.
I was going to get the shot. And when I grew up, I remember getting rid of polio and other
Yeah.
major diseases through vaccines. So I don't have any inherent distrust of vaccines or the
No.
pharmaceutical industry. I think they're greedy.
Yeah.
They got billions of dollars basically coming up with something. I don't think they did it out of the goodness of their heart.
Yeah.
I'm not fooled by any of that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I felt that because of my love for others, that I would take the sacrifice myself. And I do book signings all the time. I meet thousands of people every year in book signings, and I haven't gotten sick.
Yeah. So just to be clear, there's no judgment, and it was basically an exercise of my free will because I felt like my free will was under pressure, if not outright attack. It's like, I mean, this is a very personal thing, and I'm just gonna say no as an exercise of free will, and I'll see what happens, you know. And now I'm sick. Now I'm sick, so maybe I should have said yes. But you know, I'm very jealous of the gift of free will which God gave me. I'm very jealous of that, and I don't want to see consensus in the sciences because to me that reeks of political manipulation. When there's a so-called consensus in the sciences, I studied physics. I've worked in quantum physics and astrophysics. There's never a consensus. There's never a consensus. So that's why I exercise my free will. But it might be the greatest medicine ever devised by man. I'm open to that, and I don't judge you or anyone else. I just want to be very clear.
I don't think anything that elaborate. I think we've seen the virus mutate several times. I think it's still kind of with us in some state, not to the level where it's going to shut down the health industry, where hospitals were overloaded and they don't know where to put the bodies anymore. I think we were getting to a crisis stage, and I don't think that was manufactured. But yeah, it's a personal choice. I didn't, people who didn't do it, I knew people who didn't do it. I still talk to them. I haven't disinherited them or, or anything like that. But I made the personal choice that it was the wiser thing to do, that even if it only helped me in a marginal level, it helped me in a marginal level. And I did it for the sake of others.
Yeah, that's nice. That's what most people did. I think that's what most people did. A lot of people felt coerced and they did it under duress, though. But
yeah, there was a little bit of coercion, but again, there was a lot of fear that the health system was getting overrun very quickly, and this could get out of hand. So I think there was, and there was a lot of political pressure not to, right? It was a deeply dividing issue.
Yeah.
And I don't think the coercion was 100%. I think there was a very healthy debate and on both sides about whether you should or shouldn't. And ultimately, I think the ultimate question came down to what's your personal choice. I chose to get one.
Yeah. Before we wrap up here, it's obviously fascinating talking with you. I hope you come back. But I have a couple. I have a couple of quick questions, just rapid fire questions. Do you believe?
Sure.
Do you believe in the global catastrophic flood of Noah's day, and that only 8 people survived, as I believe? Like, I mean, a lot of Catholics think that's allegory or that it's just a story and there was a local flood or something. I'm also a young Earth creationist. I believe the whole universe is only like 7,000 something years old. But where do you stand on all about those sort of controversial fundamentalist Christian conservative positions?
Well, I'm a man of faith who believes that God is outside any of the boxes we want to put him in.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that the Earth is just 6,000 years old. I think there's enough evidence to suggest that it's not.
Yeah.
I think that our spiritual walk with God, our biblical history only goes back so far, just as our civilization only goes back so far. But we're now learning through archaeology that there was civilizations before the Mesopotamian civilizations in Göbekli Tepe and other places. There was a structure just found in England under the mud of a river that was a carved structure. The wood dates back almost half a billion years. So I think that I don't necessarily believe in the literal interpretation of those events. I do believe that we can look to the Younger Dryas event and see, since that event and an asteroid, which is one of the more likely scenarios that was part of that event, oceans rising 400 feet. And even today, a good half of our populations live on the coastline. We found submerged civilizations from the Greeks already submerged. So we know that has been a process that has happened. We found civilizations and Iron Age villages under the Black Sea, 100 feet under the Black Sea. And we know about the flooding of the Bosporus. And so I tend to believe, and there are flood myths, and I speak of them in my book, The Curse of Cortez, all over the world.
Yeah.
And I do believe that there have been not just a localized flood, but I believe that there was a geologic level of flooding that occurred everywhere. I believe that it had whether we attribute it to God's judgment, and I don't doubt that. I believe that there was a judgment element involved in all of that. But I believe that God uses the elements. He uses real things to implement his judgment. And I believe that there were floods globally affecting every culture that had a coastline. But I don't necessarily believe that maybe only 8 people survived that came out of Mount Ararat, because I think we can follow DNA evidence to basically see that people were already all over the world, but we know that every one of them were affected. And I believe that the scripture is God chose the Hebrew people to be his voice and his way of how he would message who he is.
The priesthood people, we say.
Yeah, they're not chosen because of their goodness. They're chosen because they're not good. And that should be an example for the rest of us, that he chose me even though I was a punk, not because I'm anything better than anybody in my life, and I would be I can be very blunt to say I've made every mistake possible. But I do believe a flood happened, and I do believe there was a spiritual lesson, and I do believe there was a Noah. I do believe that he did have sons, and I do believe that there were stories that were captured and relayed back from that, and that God's using the scripture, which is a history of the Jewish people, but along with a spiritual lessons to go along with how history affected them and how God relates to us as a people, and how his salvation would come out of that people. How his redemption for who we are would come out of that people. And that's why he chose them, not because that history reflects all history.
Right. Yeah. But do you believe that Adam and Eve are our first parents, and we all come from one human pair? Because it's actually a dogma of my Catholic faith.
There is DNA evidence to show that there was a genetic Eve. There's DNA evidence to show that. And in fact, we can look at our DNA evidence to see that the human species was really restricted down to a very, very, very small number of people. And at some point in time, we made a transition to have a spirit, wisdom, intelligence, speech, language, all the things that makes us into modern humans. And I believe that was the point in time when God basically created us and created us as a spiritual being and started that spiritual walk with us. I have a hard time seeing the evidence. Again, I'm a doubting Thomas. You're talking to the doubting Thomas. I'm going to look for the evidence of saying, how do I match up what the scriptures tell me on a spiritual level with what I can observe and test on a physical level to say. And now the scriptures never say that Thomas actually poked his fingers into Jesus' side. But the fact that he could, and he knew he could, was the evidence he needed. And I can't go back in history and validate what archaeologists say and what physicists say about the universe and everything else. You're an astrophysicist. There's a lot of theories about Big Bang and everything else. But I do believe that God is, we do know, and speaking to your astrophysics, that there are a number of theories. And there's evidence to support those theories. We haven't proven it yet, but there's evidence to support them that's driving those theories, that we are not the dimensions that we see and smell and touch are not the only dimensions that exist. And so just because our science hasn't been able to go and basically get into those extra dimensions, that fifth dimension of the spirit, where God says that he dwells, and test it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so there has to be at some point where you say, well, I can only speak to so much, and then faith has to basically cover the rest. And faith has to cover the rest on many of the things that we know in life, because we'll never be able to go back in time, nor will we be able to explore those other dimensions or look into the future. But soon, if the scriptures are true, that veil will be opened. We will be able to see the Lord and his angels. That means that dimension will open up. We don't know exactly how, we don't know exactly when, but we're told that it will happen. And we've just recently been getting evidence and a lot of support to say that the phenomenon of UAPs is real. Rather than extraterrestrial, extragalactic entities, I happen to hold the belief that they're interdimensional entities, which explains some of their odd behavior in our laws of physics. And so I believe that even CERN is working on creating a black hole. The reason they want to create a black hole is I won't go into all the science. I'm sure you understand it better than I do, but part of that is to be able to prove that there's a fifth dimension.
Yeah, well, I just want to clarify. I'm not a physicist, because I did my education. I worked in the field, but I didn't, pursue that. But just to be clear. But with Adam and Eve, I believe that God created a good world, and that there was a paradise, and there was no thorns or thistles or disease and death before the fall. And so, I view Adam and Eve, our first parents, very literally. I believe Eve came from the side. You may find this naive or silly, but that's what I believe. And I believe that they were far superior to us. So I believe not in evolution, but in devolution. I'm just laying it out there, just sort of compare and contrast. No. Give you some food for thought, because it is a problem. It is a problem for Christians to say that we evolved from apes. It doesn't really jive with the Christian story of God having created a good world, and that it's something to think about anyway.
I didn't say that we evolved from apes.
Okay.
I think humans are a unique species. Now, we do know that there are other subspecies of humans. And it wasn't until we got to our current species of humans that God started speaking to us, we believe. But we do know that many of the animals of the earth, including sea creatures, we share 95% of our DNA with those creatures. God used the same building blocks of life to create all life, including us. But I think we're unique. There's similarities between multiple animals. That doesn't necessarily mean that they evolved together.
Right.
Although I think that they're, and we can't really tell how the evolution of dinosaurs. We know that dinosaurs exist because we can dig up a lot of bones. We know that hairy great mammoths exist because we can dig up their bones, and we can even find intact frozen species of them. So I'm saying there's a lot that we try to come up with theories to explain how we got here to this place. We can explain some of it. Some of it doesn't make sense or fit together. We can only explain part of it. And I do believe that we are a unique species. I'm just saying that there's evidence that we've been around longer than 6,000 years.
Yeah. I'm not worried about the time. I'm not worried about the timeline.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about the timeline. I just want the dignity of paradise and our first parents to be maintained. It can't be a fall up. It has to be a fall down. Like the fall from grace. How do you understand that?
Oh yeah, well we've definitely been devolving in terms of our society, in terms of our spirit, in terms of our social structures, and I think in terms of there's evidence that there were once giants and that infected multiple creatures, and that we're basically diminished from that. Our planet is basically now more polluted. I don't think if I looked at the elements of society and the health of our planet and tried to project 100 years, I can't look at a single trend in terms of social justice, intelligence, education, health of the planet, climate, food production. I can't see politics, banking. I can't see any war, our ability to create war on each other. I don't see any trend that's moving in a positive direction, right?
Do you see a
We're
golden
all
age?
moving in evolution.
Do you see a golden, like, do you have an example of a golden age? Like, oh, it would have been nice to live in that time because there was justice and peace and these sorts of things. Do you have an example that you sometimes fantasize, oh, it would have been nice to live in this golden age, the certain, maybe it was some Minoan society or something. I don't know.
You know,
Atlantis.
every society has had, we look at I just got back from Rome.
Yeah.
Rome was an amazing culture. Their architecture, their engineering, their ability to govern was astounding. They were cruel, evil, vicious, vulgar, immoral. So there were diseases. You were either rich and at the elite, or you were a slave and you were treated worse than a beast of the field. And so I don't necessarily, I don't think it's the state of the world. I think there have been better states of the world than we're experiencing today. We've kind of basically screwed up our own planet. And I was part of an oil company for a while.
Yeah.
I was in the boardroom the day that the chairman of the board saw some of the earliest climate change research that we had created ourselves, and flew into a rage and threatened to fire anybody who brought this up again. So I know that it's been done maliciously. But I do think that it's people talk about artificial intelligence, and one of the reasons I differ with some of them, they say, well, AI, and especially quantum AI, could solve some of the stickiest problems on the planet: climate change modeling, hunger. It could solve, all of these, education toward the people of every culture. I would argue, and I have argued for years, that we already have the technology, the knowledge, the wealth, the resources to solve every single problem facing humanity, but we don't. And the reason why we don't is we lack unity of spirit and the ability to look beyond our walls and our villages. And it's that inhumane nature of man, that sinful nature of man, that keeps us from that utopia, and has always kept us from that utopia since the fall of in the garden, and will be that way, and will just get worse until the coming of the Lord. There's nothing in our technology that's going to fix our problems. If we've known about climate change for 40 years, we just keep kicking the can down the road until people die, and lots of people die, and a few elite people don't really care because they got their profits. We've seen the same thing with smoking, where the tobacco industry covered it all. And the same thing with the oil industry, with climate. We see the same thing with social media, because they were making profits. We're going to see, if power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, artificial intelligence will be the biggest power shift in all of history. And this is part of what's prophesied in the end times as well.
It's scary. When COVID struck, it was announced or unveiled or whatever, I just thought about the child who's dying of hunger every 7 seconds worldwide, and it's sad. It's a spiritual problem. It's a spiritual problem. We can, someone asked me, what's your solution to the problems in the Middle East? And my answer was Jesus Christ. You have to repent and believe. You have to repent and believe. Otherwise, you're just going to continue hating your enemies. Like, there's a well-established hatred.
I would agree with that. I would also add that those nations who call themselves Christian, if we actually acted as Christ acted,
we failed.
We treated them the way Christ treated everyone he met.
We failed. We failed.
Part of the failure is not them.
It's us.
We're part of the failure.
Absolutely.
And that's because we don't act like Christ. We call ourselves Christian, but we don't act Christ-like. And there are many things that are talked about in the Bible, but not all of them are Christ-like. And we're called to a new testament and a new covenant. That new covenant is to reflect Christ in everything we do and say. And when we don't, there's only one alternative: we're reflecting the world. And when we reflect the world, in many Christian nations, even Christian religions have acted with mind-boggling inhumanity towards others, who didn't believe the way they believed. That doesn't spread the gospel. We don't spread the gospel by violence and submission. We spread the true gospel by actually acting like Christ treated the woman at the well, like Christ treated the Roman soldier who had a son who was dying. That's where we take people who aren't us and we treat them with the love of God, and that changes the world. When we were a nation that did more of that, with I think specifically of the Peace Corps, that's when we have the greater influence on others. We've now abandoned that spirit, and we're basically into the me, myself, and I kind of spirit, and that's the problem that we're having now.
Amazing meeting you. We could talk for hours. I'm a little bit under the weather, as you know, so I'm not going to continue now, but I want to, and I want to have you back in the new year. My calendar is full because of Podmatch. What do you think of Podmatch? Do you enjoy it? Do you meet a lot of hosts there?
I've loved it. I as an author, I spent the first 3 years just focusing on writing books and not doing any promotion at all. I knew I wanted to get out there. I felt like I had some things to say, but I didn't know how to find people. And that's been a great way of getting introduced to all kinds of podcasts and podcasters that I never would have found otherwise. And so for me, it's been a real blessing and well worth the effort it takes to go through all of the
Yeah.
choices but it's been very good, and I've been very honored and humbled by the incredible hosts that I've met, like yourself, and it's been a blessing.
Thank you very much. You know, I've pretty much run out of Christian guests now, and now I'm starting to change my keywords so I can get people that are into philosophy, spirituality, just broadening my horizons so that I can keep filling my calendar. But you know, as we said before going live, you know, it's always edifying to talk to another human being, even if they're broken, even if they're wounded, even if they think they hate God, because their understanding of God is perverted by their wounds and by the woundedness of their own parents and these
Yeah.
sorts of things. It's always edifying to talk to a human if you can listen to them where they're coming from. If I could go back and meet you, you know, at your darkest, I would enjoy listening to you and hearing why you think the way you think, and I would know that God has a plan for you. And look, we fast forward to today. Wow. Wow, what a plan. What a plan.
I don't know if this is the reason why the Lord brought me through all of that, was to write about, to see the way I see about end times and analytics and events, and make those correlations. But I feel compelled to write about um, artificial intelligence, end time prophecy, and world events in a way that hopefully isn't so religious that it turns people off. But my main goal is to hopefully get people to at least think, to at least wonder, is this possible? And if prophecies are true, maybe that's a key for them to start wondering about their own spirituality, and leaving it up to God to basically get to them, speak to them there. Rather than being the guy who has to convert them, maybe my job is to just plant a seed.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's what you're doing. And you bring a lot to the table by the grace of God, you know. What do you have that you've not received? You know, if you've received it, you know, you can't boast. But you need to share it. You need to share it, and that's what you've done today. And I applaud you. And you know, I'm jealous of you because you've done so many things and you've experienced so much. You know, it's an embarrassment.
I never really considered that I was leading this great life until I got to the end, and I started, because I was so busy just worrying about the next thing I had to finish and accomplish. And then when I retired and I started looking back, and I started kind of writing and realizing all of the experiences I'd had, they kind of led up to that. I mean, I was a sailor, I was a diver, I was a Coast Guard captain, I wrote for Disney, I recorded albums, I realized I've traveled the world. I realized how truly incredibly blessed I am, that I never, ever, ever could have imagined when I ran away at 13.
Can I hear your music if I watch it? I don't like Disney, but if I suffered through a film, would I hear some of your music or no?
Um, I think there's a site up called I might say it wrong, but guymorris.bandcamp.com.
Okay. Okay.
That's still, and I'm not a great I'm a decent musician. I'm not sure that I'm the best, but there is a children's album on that site
Okay.
that many of those songs were the demos and songs I wrote for Disney. Now, Disney, you should understand, they have two real elements. They have their film subsidiary, and that's a completely
Okay.
subsidiary, and they only put like the Elton Johns and the really big guys on the film stuff.
Okay.
But they have all of their toys and all of their merchandise and all of their parks
Ah.
and everything else. And what they Disney Records, 95% of what they do is they do, okay, we're not going to sell the songs that we had on the Aladdin movie on the Aladdin toys because that costs us too
Ah.
much. We're going to
Ah.
write other Aladdin-like songs, and we're going to
Ah.
attach that with it. At the time, it was cassettes. It tells you how far
Cool.
long ago it was. But we're going to attach that cassette with the toy, and we sell that with in the Disney stores. And so a lot of what I worked on were things that were part of either their television or their toy that went along with some of their toy stuff. They had like a scary song project and a Aladdin project. I remember a dinosaurs. The television show Dinosaurs was all like a Muppet kind of show. I can't remember what else I worked on just off the top of my head. It's been a long time, and I quit working for them for some specific reasons. But yeah, but I've done some interesting things, and I think that they've all kind of added to my general perspectives, and I feel, and for mostly, I'm just blown away that God gave me such a wonderful wife and gave me peace and gave me security. I don't live in a mansion. I reprioritized away from making tons of money to just trying to make better choices with my life. And so I feel truly blessed that I've been able to experience as much as I have. I've been on corporate jets. I don't really need that. And so it's given me perspective of knowing it's not that I have to lust after the world because I've never had that and I've never experienced it. It's I've experienced it and I've been able to pull back and say that's not what's important.
What did your ex-wife's father think about the investment he made and the way it all turned out? Was he astonished?
Well, I'd like to think that he was proud, but about halfway through, he got a brain tumor and went into a coma.
Oh. Oh.
He stayed alive long enough for me to graduate, but I'm
Oh.
not sure he really comprehended.
We don't know.
Actually, no, he did comprehend that I had graduated because he was still
Okay.
then it was the graduate school that he went into a coma. So he
Okay.
never got to see me go into graduate school and go beyond that.
Okay.
But he did, but he really couldn't speak.
Right.
He really lost his
Yeah.
ability to speak. So it was really sad. Now, after he passed away, all of the sisters turned against me because he had basically taken me under his wing.
You were the favorite.
They
You were the Joseph in
furious that
the
they had
multicolored jacket you had there.
they were furious that he had spent part of their inheritance
Ah.
sending me to school.
Oh.
Now they all got, he was worth millions, so they all did pretty well. None of them, I didn't hurt any of them for sure, but I didn't. I was glad to get away from that focus on money and mine, and
Yeah.
I think that was growing up the way I did. To get that kind of response was hurtful for me, and I was glad to kind of leave it behind. Now I'm still friends with my ex-wife. We're actually going to probably have her up and have her at our house for Christmas,
Nice.
because I believe that you know we need to forgive, and we need to love, and
Nice.
she is the mother of my children, and she doesn't have anybody in her family. She's out here in the West Coast. Everybody else is out of the Chicago area, so she doesn't have anybody else, and I would hate to have anybody be alone during holidays. And so
Yeah.
we invite her, we extend a heart to her, and we try
Nice.
to make sure that she's still part of everyone's life.
Nice. This is a random question. It must going to seem like a random question, but some of my conservative friends, they don't understand why I'm pro-immigration. Like I'm not afraid of immigration. A lot of people are, I'm just wondering what your take is, because I haven't figured out yet if you're left, right, center, or if you're just not political.
I didn't used to be political. I do have some very strong political views now that have grown over the mostly since 2016. I won't go into all of that. But on immigration in particular, I have two thoughts. One is an economic thought. I'm an economist. I built macroeconomic models. One of the strongest aspects of the US economy is the ability that we have so much immigration that fills the lower level jobs that, frankly, many people say the immigrants are taking their jobs. That's BS.
Yeah.
I worked alongside migrant workers in ranches in Southern California. There wasn't enough money to go pay the white kids whose daddy had just bought them a new Mustang to go do that kind of work. So they make our economy stronger, not weaker. And the fact is, there's a number of studies. There's a book by a guy named Peter Zihan, and he's a global economist, and he's looking at the next wave of our economy and how the loss of demographics, the aging of the population, is going to cripple many of the most wealthiest countries in the Western Hemisphere, including China and the US. The US has a little bit of an advantage over all of those because while our birth rates have not replaced our population to keep us growing, we have a strong immigration story, and that basically supplements that. The other part of it is, I've been dirt poor, sleeping under bridges, an outcast from everybody because I was dirty and poor and malnourished and rejected and uneducated. I believe that the Lord tells us, when I look at the parables of the Lord, he tells us to have compassion for that stranger who's been left in the ditch. When you look at the people who are immigrating, the mothers and the children and the families, they're just wanting to have a chance to have a life that they can't have in economically, socially, and politically repressed countries that are experiencing some of the worst of climate change that we created here. And so my heart is, I think it's a problem economically, politically. I think that right now we're seeing a lot of them come in. I think we need to figure out how to handle that in terms of assimilation. I think that it would be easier if it were a smaller volume, for sure. I'm not saying that there's not a problem there, but I tend to approach that problem with a little bit more compassion and a little bit more economic awareness that once we can get them assimilated, they actually support and provide economic value that they're not being given any credit for having. Because we're very much a celebrity culture that only looks at people who are making $50 million or $1 billion or something. And so I tend to be pro-immigration from a legal perspective, and I tend to be pro-compassion immigration for people. I've been in South America. I've been in Central America. I worked alongside these people. They're hard, they're honest, they're hardworking, they're sincere, and they're Christian.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah.
If we're calling ourselves Christian and we're unwilling to help other Christians, then there's a hypocrisy that goes deep to the soul.
My friend here, Lamo in the live chat.
I know a lot of people will disagree with
Yeah, he's disagreeing with you strongly. He says, "Oy vey," which I think is a dig at the Jews, because he brought up the JQ earlier. Bring more young men from Somalia. I happen to like Somalian people. I worked with Somalian people. I like them. I like their culture, and they're Christian too. They'll be safe from global warming over here. So he's taking a jab at your global warming thing. I'm skeptical of global warming too, by the way. But I love people. That's my main thing, is I love people. Last question. I promise it's the last question. What about libertarianism? A lot of people, young people, are excited about this idea of libertarian as a sort of economic and political point of view. It seems a bit naive and silly to me. Did you ever go through a phase where you looked into libertarianism?
I haven't really looked into it that much. I'm really not. I came out of college as a Republican because I was business oriented. But Republican back in the late 70s, early 80s is a different brand of what we
Yeah.
have now.
Yeah.
There was a balance to that. At that point in time, we had the average corporation would get taxed based on their level of income as much as 50%, and our deficit wasn't growing out of the seams. We could build roads, and we could build airports, and we could build infrastructure, and we could build good schools, and we could pay teachers a living wage, and people could actually live with a living wage. Now, we've got corporations that are basically getting off with, many of them are making billions and billions and paying effectively nothing in taxes. So we've really distorted the tax basis. And I think that there's a lot of things that going on with the modern GOP. I don't believe in the MAGA movement at all. The libertarianism is sort of this thing of, well, we should have every individual. My understanding, and I probably don't have a good understanding of it, is that it's sort of an ultimate emphasis on freedom. I don't believe any freedom comes without responsibility. And when I hear people saying, talking about freedom, my first question I want to ask is, what are your responsibilities and what are your accountabilities that go along with that freedom? And they don't really have it. Most of the time, they don't want to talk about that, or they don't really have never thought about that
It's
much.
the magic invisible hand. Well, everything will sort itself out. Don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry.
So if you're going to live in a society, and we live in a society that
Yeah.
comes with both advantages and disadvantages, and we call the advantages freedoms, we call the disadvantages responsibilities. And you can't take one without the other, and I don't believe in one without the other.
Maybe I'm a bit stuffy and old-fashioned, but I've always opposed the sexual revolution and women in the workforce, and it just seems like a disaster. Like, I want family, 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 and we've lost that, and now people can't even afford their rent, much less to buy a house. It's like, and they're two parents working. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. Maybe I'm oversimplifying the sexual revolution as the cause, but maybe we'll go back to the French
Well, I don't think
Revolution.
sexual revolution is a cause as much as an outcome of the fact that we've got more of an economic disparity, income disparity, where if you can't afford to pay your rent, you need to have two people working in order to survive. That's partly an income disparity, and for some women, I believe that if we really look at the ability to have a fulfilling life, some women are. Let me put it this way: just because I don't believe my mother was a very good mother.
Okay.
Some people are really cut out to be parents, and some people are not. I think that there are some people who I think to have family is good. Coming from a dysfunctional family, I think the emphasis should be on how do we make sure that the families are healthy, that they're cared for, that they're taken care of, that the children have a good education, that they don't have to work 3 jobs, in order to survive. I think the emphasis should be different. I do believe family is important. I think it's the core value that I think is the core soil. Jesus talks about seed in different soils. And the soils that are rocky soils and hard soils or soils of weed are all based on the family environments that we grew up in. I grew up with crappy soil. I've had to spend a lifetime trying to till my soil to get it cleaner. So while I agree with family, and I'm not going to say that the sexual revolution was good. I don't believe that the promiscuity is good. I think that that's led to a lot of social issues, emotional issues, mental health issues, sexual disease issues. I think that there are a lot of things, and I was a part of that because when I went off the deep end, I was very sexually promiscuous. Until I had to learn from my own experiences the amount of pain that was causing, the amount of harm that was causing, then I had to make the choice in myself that I was going to be married to one woman and I was going to find the right, and that God sent me a good one. But I don't see that as the core to all the problems, nor do I, I think a lot of people, and I'm probably going to tick some people off too. I don't think that the homosexuality is the core to all the problems as much as greed, hubris, pride, and hatred. And they don't affect my life. The choices I make affect
Yeah.
my life. I had to learn to make healthy choices, but there's not a book that I can, there's no movie. I've seen movies with gay people. I didn't turn gay. I've seen books that had, some
Yeah.
sort of gay influence. I just put them down.
Yeah.
Nothing changes me. It's my own choices in life. And I've made bad choices before I
Yeah.
learned how to make better ones. And so, but I think that when we look at the beasts of the world, those are the power structures that influence or oppress with things like it's too expensive to live, not because it should be, but because somebody's gotten greedy. We've got a culture of greed that's gotten out of hand. And it's all about the profit margins and the growth and the increase in my equity. And there's reasons why, beyond the social issues of why people can't afford to buy homes, why school systems are not doing as well, why we have some of the social issues that in America, we have a gun issue. Has nothing to do with the social, with the sexual evolution. That has to do with money going into a gun lobby. And so I see other issues. I don't, not to say that those aren't issues as well, but I don't really see those as the roots of these other bigger things.
Yeah. So much more to talk about, and I do have a bunch more questions that just came into my mind, but I'm going to cut myself short. I'm going to say no more questions. But it's a real joy to meet you. You could probably
David,
talk
it's been a
for
pleasure.
days. You don't even need to sleep, so we could talk all night, right? You don't even need to sleep.
I'll be up for hours. I know it's later where you are. My wife has probably already eaten dinner, which is okay because I'm actually on a diet right now, so I probably need to do it. But I love talking with you. I love talking about these philosophical issues, even where we may not agree with the different things. It's always good to have a conversation where it's more about understanding than judgment. And I do know that I have some of my ideals don't mesh with everybody. And especially around end times, but as well as politics and social stuff, they're always going to get differences of opinion there. And I can only say that my experiences in the world have gone from wealthy to rich, and now I'm neither. I mean, from poor to rich, and now I'm neither. From homeless to corporate boardrooms. I've worked with governments, generals, CEOs, CXOs, and I've lived on the streets as well. I've worked with migrants as well. I think God has given me a broad sense of the world, and I've come to my own conclusions as to what I believe because of it.
Yeah, well, you're reminding me of St. Paul when he talked about learning to live with and without and all that. And, all he went through. St. Paul, he's a real hero. We could do an hour just on him. It's so amazing. But God bless you. Please pray for me and mine. I don't know what your prayer life's like. I don't know what your prayer life's like, but we're going to talk about that next time.
Next time, and I look forward to hearing from you. Just let me know when you want me back. I'd be more than happy to come.
God bless you. Thank you so much. Take good care.
Thank you, David. God bless.
We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.